Well, good evening. It is an honor to get to address you all tonight, and especially to address our newest Tritons. Now, I know you probably aren't in the mood for another speech right now. And if you have already looked at your class schedule and you know that I'm the ancient world history teacher, you may be thinking to yourself, shoot, this guy's probably going to expound the obscure developmental etymology of a Latin word I don't know. And I really wish that I could tell you that I'm not going to do that. However, I'm going to do exactly that, and you're going to like it. And that sounds like a joke, but I do hope that you like this, because I want to tell you in advance what I'm trying to do. I want to give you all a rallying cry, a motto, a theme word. And what I'm going to do is tell you what it means, or at least what it ought to mean, and I'm going to do that by telling you its history, because yes, I'm a history teacher. I'm also going to root it in its biblical significance, because I'm also a pastor. I know, it's like a dangerous combo. But I'm going to do that because at the end of this time, my hope for you freshmen is that you would have an idea of what I mean when I use this word, and what you could mean when you use this word, and that word would then become for you a rallying cry, a battle cry, that you can use to rouse yourself to do what needs to be done when it comes time to do it. And that word is diligence. Now, I believe that my dad was the first person to teach me this word when I was about 14. And if he wasn't the first to teach me the word, then he was certainly the first to demonstrate its meaning every day of my life by his actions. So by the time he told me the word and charged me to live it out, I knew what he meant. When I was about 14, I got my first job working outside of my own home for pay, doing yard work for other people in our neighborhood. And my dad told me to work diligently. And I knew what he meant. I knew that when he said work diligently, he meant work hard, put myself into it, to show up on time and to work hard and to not work slow to eke more money out of my hourly rate, but to give it everything I had. That's what he meant. And that was good advice that he had exemplified every day. But there were depths to that word that even he did not know at the time, and I wouldn't discover those depths until I was a first-year Latin student. Now, when I was in high school and I started studying Latin, I thought it would be cool to pick up a copy of the Vulgate, which is the Latin translation of the scriptures that was produced in the late 4th century by a guy named Jerome. This is the history part. And Jerome wanted to translate all of the scriptures, the Hebrew Old Testament and the Greek New Testament, into one language for all Christians all over the world. And that language at the time was Latin. And he came to a very important verse, a verse that shows up very similarly in most of the Gospels, in which Jesus gives the greatest commandment. And in this story, we find in the Gospels, a lawyer comes to Jesus and asks him, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment?" And Jesus replies by saying, "There are two. The first is, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself." Now, when I was in high school, I was already familiar with those verses. I had heard those commandments. But I was surprised to find, when I was flipping through a copy of the Vulgate as a new Latin student, that in the Latin text, the word for love was diliges. Diliges Dominum Deum tuum. Love the Lord your God. And I thought, that's funny. That word looks a little bit like diligence. And so I did a little Googling and found out, wow, that's where we get the word diligence. And I thought that's funny because diligence means like hard work and stuff. And this here is a word for love. So how do we get from a word for love to a word for hard work and stuff? And that story, I mean this, changed my life. Because that word went through a lot of ups and downs, and that's what I want to tell you about. It started from two roots, die and legere. Die means apart, legere means to choose, so you had diligere, to choose apart, to pick something out of multiple options. And eventually that came to mean something like love. How? Well, what do you do when you love somebody or something? It means that of all the alternatives, you chose that one. You plucked it out, and you said, this is the one that I will give my devotion, my attention, my care to. So it's not love like, I fell in love. I developed an affectionate feeling. It's I chose this. And when Jerome was translating the Great Commandment, he said the kind of love Jesus is commanding here, love the Lord your God, love your neighbor, is not the love of feeling. It is a love of action. It is a love of commandment. It is a love of choice. What you might call willful devotion. To devote yourself to something and say, I've chosen this. Now here's the funny thing though. Do you get to choose your neighbors? Not really. Do you get to choose who God is? Definitely not. As Mr. O'Neill just said, you don't get to choose your family, and yet maybe you do. Because what's been put in front of you has been put in front of you. You can't do anything about it. Is that your family? Is it who God is? Is it who lives around you, who your classmates are? You didn't get to pick that. But you do get to choose if you're going to give them the care, attention, and devotion that they ought to be given. You get to choose what has already been placed in front of you. Or you can just not choose. And you can just float along half-heartedly and do your thing. But what we're commanded to is to choose. Diligere, to choose out, to devote yourself to it. And then the word gets even crazier, because there's a later form of the word that's a noun, and that word is diligentia. And there's a Latin scholar named Cicero who once said that diligentia is the virtue on which all other virtues hang. Well, what does diligentia mean? According to Cicero, it means carefulness and fastidiousness and painstakingness. Those are some big words, but basically it means being careful, paying attention, being detail-oriented. Put yourself into it wholeheartedly. And he said that's the key virtue, because you can't do any of the other virtues if you aren't doing them attentively and carefully. So now we've gone from a word that means to make a willful choice of devotion to a word that means attentiveness and carefulness. In other words, you got to choose to care. We're not just commanded to love, we're also commanded to care about things we might not really want to care about. And that's actually maybe just as hard. You are commanded to care. Dang, that's a tough one, because you just might not care. And yet that's part of this word, and it keeps going. One of the funniest stages in its history is in French. In the 16th and 17th century, a diligence carriage was a carriage that was well suited for long journeys because it was reliable and dependable. And you were like, that carriage will take me a long way. It's like a Toyota, right? So that's a diligence carriage. Shout out to Lil Corolla back here. So you've got a diligence carriage. It's reliable. It'll get you a long way. And so then people speaking English start using diligence to mean somebody who works hard and gets it done. And by the time we all came along, that's really all the word meant to us. I'm a diligent worker. I get the job done. I put my back into it, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But when I tell you that I want diligence to be your rallying cry this year, because it became my rallying cry when I was in high school and I stumbled across it in the Vulgate and did a bunch of Googling and found all this out and was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be talking about this for the next 10 years, and here I am. The reason I'm telling you that I want this to be your rallying cry is because it means a lot more than just do the hard work or whatever. That's good. But here's what I'm telling you. When I'm telling you to do diligence is to choose the thing that's already been put in front of you, whether it's the homework that you don't want to do or the person that you don't really get along with. You're going to choose the thing that's already been put in front of you. Don't just be passive about it. They're right there. Choose them. Because your other alternative is to just be like, about it. That's boring. You don't want to be half-hearted about things. You can choose to be half-hearted about things, but that's not a fun life. You want to be wholehearted about things. So choose what's right in front of you. Diligere, willful devotion. It's the starting point of love. And then what else do? You care. You know, there's a quote I love from C.S. Lewis when he says that sometimes you don't feel like you love your neighbor, and so you just have to act like you think you would act if you did feel like you loved your neighbor, and then eventually you might start loving your neighbor. And it's kind of the same way with caring about things. You might not care about the reading that you're given, so just pretend like you care and do what you would do if you did care, and eventually you might start to care. Whether because you care about the thing, or because you care about the kind of person the thing could turn you into, or because you care about the person who's in front of you, care. Choose, willfully devote yourself, and then care. And that means attentiveness. That means investing of yourself in the object of your attention. That's a person or a project or whatever else. And then the end point of that is that makes you a diligent doer. You work hard. You choose the thing that's in front of you. Even if you didn't choose it for yourself, you're going to choose it now. You're going to devote yourself to it, and you're going to do it with a whole heart, because it is so much better to live with a whole heart than half a heart. And so when you look at the great commandment, and Jesus says, love the Lord your God and love your neighbor, and those of you who are interested in hermeneutics and exegesis, I know that this is an overrealized exegesis, please forgive me, but I'm going to read that back into it and say, choose to devote yourself with attention and care willfully to the goodness and glory of God and to the need of the people around you. That's what that means. At least it's what it could mean. It's what I hope it means for you. You might be familiar with the phrase due diligence. That's D-U-E, as in do your due diligence. That means put the effort that is required by the task at hand, or at least the task is owed. But I'm going to give you a different phrase. Due diligence, as in D-O, do it, as in just do it. Due diligence. And that's my rallying cry for you. That's my charge for you, freshmen. class of 2027, to do diligence, to choose what's been put right in front of you, to choose the people sitting next to you, even if you didn't choose them when you lined up in the other room, to choose the homework that I'm going to assign to you on Tuesday, to choose these things, even if you didn't choose them. And that sounds like a paradox, but I promise you it's not. And I really mean it when I say, even as a weird, funky old history teacher who spent time in high school investigating the etymological history of diligence, that it's really worth it to have this as a battle cry for yourself. Because there are times you won't want to care, times you won't want to be attentive, you won't want to choose, you won't want to love. And in those times, I hope you hear this little echoey voice. It doesn't have to sound like mine. In fact, I hope it doesn't. But an echoey little voice that just says, do diligence. Do diligence. Thank you. I'm going to welcome up our principal, Dr. Robertson.